Hi, everyone, and welcome to UCU Live. This afternoon, we are discussing our Green New Deal, which we are launching today. I'd like you all to just sort of say hi, first of all, to Jennifer, who's signing for us. And we've got lots of other really exciting speakers. For years, our union has been leading the way on climate change in the trade union movement. UCU helped to found the Greener Jobs Alliance and the Trade Union Clean Air Network. Our policies oppose fracking and airport expansion, and that is unlike some other unions. And we have called for climate justice fund to be established by wealthy polluting nations. Given our commitment to equality, we also recognise that climate change is a social justice issue. The consequences of climate change are not distributed equally, we know that. The climate crisis has been caused overwhelmingly by higher income nations, but it is the poorest nations that will feel the effects of climate injustice most acutely. Climate change is making immigration regimes in countries like ours even more oppressive. Climate change is a gender issue too. The UN has calculated that 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. We therefore are committed resources to developing our work on climate change, which includes the development of this bargaining guide that we are launching today. We have over 300 UCU Green reps all across the sectors that UCU represents, and we have a really fantastic Green reps training program. At the time that we're obviously producing all of these materials and we're doing this session, we are in the midst of COVID-19 lockdown. And I say this from Leicester, where the lockdown, as you know, has been extended. The coronavirus pandemic has been a reminder that our existence on Earth is fragile. There has been a lot of similarities between the climate crisis and the coronavirus crisis. In both cases, there has been a refusal to listen to scientists, to the academic community, or to the wider communities of people who are most affected by the crisis. If we want to create a more just and sustainable world as we emerge from lockdown, we need a Green New Deal strategy founded on social justice and workers' rights. And that needs to be led by trade unions like UCU, because there is a real opportunity here to rebuild on better foundations. A climate catastrophe will worsen inequalities that already exist. Dealing with climate change requires planning, it requires concerted action, and not just short-sighted competition or exploitation. And as reps within colleges and universities, and by using the guide that we have produced at UCU, that you'll be able to find in links associated with this webinar, by using this guide, you can start your bargaining negotiations with employers and make a contribution to that planning and action. A real crucial element of climate change policy is building alliances. And I'm really happy today that we've got people from Students Organising for Sustainability UK and from the Bakers Union, because those alliances are really crucial to how we develop a Green New Deal for colleges and universities, which will see our members and our students coordinating with each other to seek urgent and meaningful changes from institutions. When I stood for UCU General Secretary last year, I did it on the complete conviction that members wanted an even more assertive campaigning union. Our members, UCU members, are not just motivated by a narrow set of interests like pay or pensions, and bargaining and negotiation over any workplace issue will develop your branch's capacity to campaign and organise on all the other elements that affect our working lives. I have every confidence that our representatives and our members working collaboratively, building the solidarities that we're going to discuss today with students, with other trade unions, with other activist groups, can really make a significant contribution towards tackling the climate emergency. So, with that said, I want to bring in our first set of speakers for our first session, which is what is the UCU Green New Deal? So if I can welcome in Ross Gray, who is a UCU Environmental Officer at Goldsmiths. Hello. Lynn Runkle, Director of Education for SOS UK.
Hi.
And also Marianne Quick, who is our very own bargaining and negotiation official for climate and sustainability. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
So, Marianne, I mean, do you want to kind of introduce the Green New Deal for colleges and universities for us?
I would love to. Thanks very much, Jo. So here we have it. Here is our Green New Deal and what it looks like inside. We're going to have a chat through some of the features of it today. And I think for those branch officers that are familiar with our model claims and bargaining advice around casualisation and equality, it follows a really familiar format to that those guides. And it's a step-by-step guide with a set of suggested demands, some leverage tips, and an outline model claim letter to be submitted to employers. So delighted to be joined by Quinn, who we've from SOS UK. We've worked hard on putting this claim, this advice together, and Ross Gray from Goldsmiths, who led a trailblazing campaign last year, which resulted in their own Green New Deal. And was a bit of an inspirational model, I think, for what we've done here on a national level. So I think it's really important that we get to hear from Roz about what they did there and where they're up to now. So in terms of our work with Quinn and SOS UK, it'd be really interesting to hear about why you think, from your perspective, it was important to do this as a joint endeavour within our educational institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marianne. And thanks all for hosting this conversation today. And as Jo was kind of outlining, for UCU's leadership on this agenda too. So from SOS UK, I'm really delighted that we're working in partnership with UCU on this Green New Deal project, because it's enormously important for staff and students to work together in collaborative, equal, active partnerships to drive change in our institutions. We know that institutions can be slow to change and slow to transform, and we do not have the time to wait. And so through students and staff working together, campaigning at all levels of the institution, and using the power that local UCU branches have in conjunction with the power that students' unions have, we know that we can create this transformational change through Green New Deal policies at colleges and universities right across the UK. So I think, well, what we'll hear from Roz around how some of this happened at Goldsmiths, I think really illustrates what that student and staff collaboration can look like, and why that partnership in driving forward this change is so important, because there's aspects of creating change in a university or college setting that students can drive forward in really unique and different ways, and things that a local UCU branch, academics and non-academic staff can drive forward in really unique and different ways. And so it's through working in that collaboration that we can really create the transformation at the pace that we need.
Great. Roz, do you want to just talk about what Goldsmiths did to give other branches an idea of how you approached it before we look at the claim in a bit more detail?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me here. And I really wish I could have attended this kind of event before I actually got involved with this. So the Green New Deal for Goldsmiths campaign was started by me and Jason Hickle in November 2018. And if you cast your mind back, that was just after the IPCC report had been published, which gave a really stark warning of the impact that a rise of 1.5 degrees in global warming would have globally. And but we'd also, sort of as individuals, been approaching the management and trying to raise various issues, you know, about Goldsmiths having a renewable energy supply, about divestment, about stopping the use of glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup, all over the campus, close to schools and nurseries and so on. So there were a whole set of interrelated issues that we felt weren't being addressed by the institution. We were really coming up against a brick wall trying to do this on our own. So we got together and we drew up a petition with consulting with other staff and students who we knew were knowledgeable about these issues and as passionate as we were. And the petition had covered 5 main areas. The The first was about money and divestment. The second was energy. The third was food. The fourth was plastics and waste disposal, reducing waste across the campus. And the fifth was land, about switching to organic, chemical-free gardening, and really trying to maximize the way in which the campus could be used to support biodiversity. So, we're talking about not only a climate crisis, but also an ecological breakdown. So that petition was circulated in November 2018, and it gained nearly 1,000 signatures from staff and students. And then we wanted to take it to our unions. And so the Students' Union actually passed a motion in January 2019 in support of the Green New Deal for Goldsmiths. And that was followed just a couple of months later in March by a UCU motion that actually was much stronger than our original demands, because that motion called for Goldsmiths to go carbon neutral by 2030. So already the act of collectivizing this struggle strengthened it and increased the sort of ideas that were being fed into it and so on. At that point, we started reaching out to senior management at Goldsmiths, working with the sustainability officer, and also reaching out to Unison to start to work with them, because of course many of the people who were actually directly involved in these policies and in the practices, such as the gardening and so on, were not UCU members. So it's really important to work with Unison as well as with the Students' Union. And then in that summer, in August 2019, the management of Goldsmiths accepted our demands, and in fact at that point we pushed further, and they agreed to an aim of going carbon neutral by 2025, which is in line with the Paris Climate Treaty. So that was a really important moment. We really felt that there were questions of governance involved here. So we insisted that the steering group in charge of making these steps happen, right, so realizing that aim, should include full union representation from UCU, from Unison, and the Students' Union. And they set up a whole series of working groups to devise how they would go about it, and they sought expert advice. So where we are now is that some of those aims were achieved very quickly. So Goldsmiths has committed to divestment, and certain things happened straight away, like they took the most carbon intensive foods off the college, the menus of the college caterers and so on. And other things are much more in process. So Goldsmiths has just launched a new web page which outlines the first sort of stage of that, which is its carbon reduction plan, and that's going to be followed with I think 4 or 5 other sort of stages of actions and policies. So yeah, I mean it's an ongoing process. It's really about also trying to keep the process as open and transparent as possible, and trying to in a way constantly sort of increase the way in which we're understanding how issues of labour are connected to those of the environment and so on. So and representation and accessibility and all of these questions are of course really intricately connected. The other thing that came out of the Green New Deal and the senior management's acceptance of it was that there was a need to really look at curriculums and at research practices as well. So those are the 2 other kind of main things that weren't in the original petition but have become part of the Green New Deal campaign.
That's brilliant, Ros, and actually is a great link to our next piece that we're going to talk about, which there's various steps. You'll have seen the infographic that was just up on the screen earlier about how branches in conjunction with students' unions can approach the submission of this claim. And it's important to remember that just because we go and submit a letter and ask for it nicely doesn't mean that an employer is going to deliver on all our demands. So this is very much trying to illustrate that it's a joint campaign, an industrial approach. So that's included in and worked through in some detail. But in terms of the substance of the demands that go within the claim itself, We can't cover all of those today, but we can, some questions that have came into the webinar before do relate to what areas the claim covers. And one of those was, how does the Green New Deal align with embedding sustainability into teaching and learning? And this is a real area of expertise for Quinn, so I think to be able to adequately answer this.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Green New Deal approach, I think, as Roz has just demonstrated in that discussion of what's happened at Goldsmiths, and certainly the way in which the sort of bargaining guidance that UCU's developed outlines this, is that we can't separate sustainability into these single kind of siloed fights that we sometimes feel ourselves having, and that we sometimes, I think, approach sustainability as like one battle after the next, and that really segmented approach is only hurting us in the long run, rather than looking at it in a much more systemic sense in a whole institution approach. And so what the Green New Deal does really, really effectively is think about sustainability through the lens of social justice, and in a really holistic sense, challenges us to think about how our institutions and how our education system can do better. And so often, I think the history of sustainability in education in the UK has been so focused on the campus and our sort of buildings and the built environment and our environmental practices. Very often we have failed to challenge ourselves to think about the more social dimensions of that. And only more recently, in the last probably 10 years, have we sufficiently prioritized thinking more about the curriculum. And I think that's a journey that many institutions are very much on now. So the curriculum needs to be a core part of how we approach a Green New Deal in our institutions, because it's all well and good to have good practices across the campus, but the greatest output of our institutions is our students and the lives that they go on to lead for 50, 60, 70 years after they leave education, their formal education system. And it's through their impact, no matter what discipline they're studying, no matter what career and profession they go on to have, it's through that they have a life of impact. And so by embedding it within all aspects of student learning and really challenging ourselves to think about how sustainability can be deeply embedded across a range of different disciplines, this needs to be a core part of what our demands look like for a Green New Deal, because otherwise we're really selling ourselves short in terms of the real purpose of our institutions. Around having that focus on what education actually looks like. And so in the bargaining and negotiation sort of toolkit, you'll find things in there around not only the formal curriculum and what students might be learning through their courses, but also how we integrate things around the informal curriculum. So the sorts of activities students are involved with through their students' union, campaigns, clubs, societies, and also through the subliminal curriculum and the sort of social norms that we develop on campus. And many institutions now, I think, are having many more discussions around decolonization, which is really important and fits really nicely into this broader understanding of sustainability as being an issue of social justice and the climate crisis being a racist crisis. And so through understanding the intersectionality of all of these issues, I think we can be challenging our institutions to really be reorienting our curricula around these issues and making sure that our graduates are much, much better equipped to tackle the challenges that they will undoubtedly face in their future careers and essentially lead us to a much better future than current leaders are doing.
Thanks, Quinn. And there's just 1 minute left to try and pick up some of the other questions that have come in. So, for example, there's a question on when is the union going to start campaigning around car parking on campus? And another interesting one, which a lot of people don't realise, is pollution and chemicals and carbon emissions caused by digital devices and servers. So they're really specific examples. And what the claim doesn't do is to address all of those in minutiae, but there are sections within the claim around carbon management plans and how we can influence and use them to hold institutions to account, and land use. So there's a whole section on food and land use, and clearly car parking would come under that, as well as the carbon elements. So there's obviously lots more to talk about in there, but there is a training program to accompany the Green New Deal. So UCU will be running that for our reps, and you can check that out on our training pages. And also SOS UK are running training for their students and students' unions. So this really is a twin track approach on how we want to address this in a very systematic way within our institutions.
Great, thank you. And I think those sorts of questions about, you know, how we in our institutions really campaign on those issues that, you know, might be key to us, as Marianne says, are in the deal, and there's going to be lots of training for you to be able to really kind of think through how you would do that in your institution. The next session for the next 15 minutes is building solidarities for a green recovery. And I'm just going to temporarily say bye to our current speakers. Bye-bye. And welcome in. You were all amazing. Thank you. And welcome in Scarlett Westbrook from Teach the Future campaign. And also a fellow friend and comrade from the Bakers Union, the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, Ian Hobson, who's the president there. Hello, everyone. So just as way of introduction, Teach the Future is an inclusive campaign run by secondary and tertiary education students to repurpose the UK education system around the climate emergency and ecological crisis. They're great. They believe and are actively demonstrating that young people of any age can learn to think critically and creatively about the future and really develop the agency to influence. And I'm really excited that we're going to get to hear from one of their amazing activists, Scarlett, who will be able to tell us more about their campaign. And Ian, as I've already said, is the president of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union. They're a really interesting union, as you know. I'm a big fan of the Bakers Union, Ian. I think we've been doing some great work on this for many years, been undertaking some really innovative and progressive campaigns, representing members from an industry that is responsible for emitting some of the largest amounts of CO2, and really took it as their duty as a trade union to inform and inspire their members and bargained with their employers to take a more active role in combating the detrimental effects of climate change. So exactly what we're trying to do in UCU. I think there's a lot of really nice synergies and similarities, and I'm going to come to you after I've spoken to Scarlett for a little bit, Ian, to kind of explore that. So welcome. Scarlett, I was wondering if I could start with you, and how can our members help to build solidarities with and really support Teach the Future campaign in securing a truly sustainable future?
Thank you. So my name's Scarlett, as you just said, and I'm a 16-year-old, as the balloons there show, climate justice activist. It was my birthday last week, and a campaign coordinator at Teach the Future. So Teach the Future is a student-led campaign organising around attaining systemic reform of the education system, so that climate justice education is in every subject from nursery to university and apprenticeships and beyond. And it also involves retrofitting all schools and colleges to ensure that they are carbon net zero by 2030, which is going to be creating millions of green, secure and hopefully well-paid jobs. Because we need to build a resilient society which is equipped with all of the skills and knowledge necessary in order to deal with the now inevitable impacts of the climate catastrophe. However, we can't do this with the current provision of incredibly limited climate justice education in the current education system, and it's vital that we give students access to this necessary knowledge, regardless of whether you're a builder or a banker, climate change is going to impact us all in so many different ways. And so we've got a duty in ensuring that our future generations have this knowledge so that they can effectively cope and deal with these impacts. It also means combating climate anxiety. Like, the concept of existential collapse is quite disconcerting. So we need to ensure that teaching professionals have the knowledge and experience needed in order to combat this in students. So to do all of this, we've been organising in a variety of ways. The most notable was our parliamentary reception, which was on the 26th of February. We had about 100 MPs come to look at our launch of the English Climate Emergency Act, which is a bill that we drafted, and we believe it's the first bill to have been drafted by students about declaring climate emergency in schools, ensuring that we retrofit education buildings, and that we completely change the education system rather than just the curriculum, as that doesn't apply to things like academies and further education establishments. We've also been meeting with individual politicians from all parties. We've been working with some unions such as UCU here, and we've also been trying to work with local and combined authorities, as well as lots of other things. So you see, just like society, climate change discriminates. It will be those who are less privileged who will be worst affected. And this includes our workers and our young people, which is why student worker solidarity is so important. We know that workers form the backbone of society, which is why we want to ensure that we can create secure green jobs today and provide our future generations with the knowledge needed to carry these secure green jobs into tomorrow. Decarbonising the economy by starting with education buildings sets an example to our younger generations and hopefully implants this principle of making sure that we decarbonise and create and sustain justice for all workers and all people. So when it comes to what you guys can do to help us out, we would absolutely love if you could sign up to our mailing list and write to your MP to pass on our asks to the Education Secretary and the Chancellor. We've got an email template on our website, and it would be really helpful if you could do that. And our strength is in our supporters, and we're just really, really, really happy to be able to be working with UCU and stand in solidarity with you guys and all of your members. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's every time I do any events where there's student representatives, whether it's from your campaign or SOS, I'm just always really inspired by the work that you do, but also the crystal clear clarity that you are able to convey the biggest problems that we face, and also the real kind of solid actions that you need to do, and then how we can support that. And I just think it's really inspiring, and I'm so glad that we're all working together and to be able to keep formulating this, because, you know, the way in which you connect what is happening with the climate and what we need to do as a work issue, I think is really important. And a lot of people want to try and address these in isolation, and it's key. And that's where I think I want to bring in Ian, really, because obviously as a trade union, you've acknowledged that as well. And I think looking forward, how can we build solidarities with the BEF and AWU members over issues that, you know, we've already talked a bit about, green issues and the environment. I'm thinking about the other issues that impact on our members. So issues of casualisation, issues of low pay, and how do we really build solidarities between us so we can work towards a truly sustainable jobs within a just and fairer world.
Firstly, let me congratulate UCU on this launch today, and being able to take part in this has been fantastic. And really, you know, it's a real honour to be working alongside the UCU in many different areas. Recently, you know, we thank you very much for the support you've given us with our Next Strike campaign and all the other support you've given us. And I think there's a demonstration there in itself about how we support one another and how, you know, working people can assist one another at times of need, at times of, you know, of needing support. So those are key moments and something that we never actually forget. And I think it's truly inspiring that when one worker comes and supports another worker, the benefits that those workers feel, last for a long time. And I think, our entry into the environment, I mean, was we got invited to an event in Blackpool, and I asked our executive what our green policies were, and they told me it was just a thought Celtic. Obviously, we've moved a long way since then. But from our perspective, what we see going forward is we've probably, learned so much from taking part in the campaigns around the environment. Obviously we was, out there at Barton Moss, campaigning against anti-fracking. We had some of our members obviously there on a daily basis, with part of Preston New Road across the country, and built solidarity and a community spirit in those places, which has then led to us being able to organise on the ground and get support for campaigns which at that particular time were seen as extreme, like demanding the right for people to be paid a living wage of at least £10 an hour, but ending inequality in the workplace by calling for an end of the youth minimum wage. I mean, we recognise that discrimination exists, but for some reason it seemed to be acceptable for young people to be paid less. But we didn't think that was right, and I think those are actual real-life demonstrations about how working together in communities and using, the Green New Deal, using, our connections at your pension strikes, for example, which was absolutely phenomenal in changing, the life opportunities really for people across the universities and colleges. So I think that's a demonstration of how we work together, rather than how can we work together. I think we already are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, the way in which unions and organising like activist groups such as Teach the Future and SOS can work together is highlighting these common areas where we need to show each other solidarity and really stepping in and doing it so that, we are all kind of pulling together. I was wondering if just before we kind of move on to the next session, I know another kind of area of overlap, Ian, where our union's trying to do a lot of work around sexual harassment. I know that your union were really on the front foot on that as well, weren't you, around the hospitality industry? And I know this is a greening session, but whilst we're talking about solidarities and actually protecting workers, I wondered if you just wanted to say a bit about that in a minute or two. Would you be comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, we teamed up with an organisation called Women Against Rape.
Oh, you've just gone a bit grainy. Sorry, say that again.
So years ago, we teamed up with an organisation called Women Against Rape, which is based at the Crossroads Centre in Kentish Town, and launched a campaign about zero tolerance against sexual harassment in the hospitality sector, because it seems to be acceptable that if you're a barmaid or a barman, getting touched up and reporting that to your manager was seen as acceptable and just went with the territory. Well, we don't think that is acceptable. We don't think it should go with the territory. And people who want to use the facilities should respect the staff, because people go there to earn a living, and they're not subject or not be subject to somebody's desires. I mean, there's a time and a place for people to beat up and so, but a workplace is not one of those environments where it's acceptable at any time.
Yeah, no.
We're working with you now, as I believe, obviously our new General Secretary.
Yeah.
Yourself are working together on the launch of a new campaign, which I think is fantastic. And obviously, we look forward to working and supporting you on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to sort of cover that, along with green issues, I think that a number of general secretaries at the minute are really trying to work together to say what are the big issues that the union movement should really be on the front foot on. So Dave Ward, obviously in the CWUs, talking about unions actively having their own anti-racism work and not just sort of outsourcing that, to other organisations. Me and Sarah, your General Secretary, we're looking at issues around sexual harassment and violence and how General Secretaries can really lead the charge on that. And obviously UCU and all the other groups involved in today are looking at the Green New Deal and how that connects across to other issues of climate justice. So I think there's just so much opportunity for us to really say what are the key issues we have to face, and really find those kind of key allies across the movement, sometimes in areas where you wouldn't, to really kind of educate. And I think that's the lovely thing about this session. So anyway, I need to draw to a close. So thank you, Scarlett. Thank you, Ian. And I think I'm bringing in Marianne again. And we also have Graham Peterson joining us, who's from the Greener Jobs Alliance. Hello, both. Hi again, Marianne. Hi, Graham.
Hi. Thanks,
so,
Jen.
Are you? Do you want to take over, Marianne?
I can do. I'll give you a rest. How about that? So yeah, this next session is about how we make the case for a sustainable future, and this is really where the Green New Deal and Fund the Future, we're trying to take elements of the Green New Deal as part of this broader Fund the Future campaign, and as part of it on a broader level, we've been making the case that we need a green, sustainable and just recovery from this emerging from this crisis. So we've been lobbying government alongside Teach the Future and organisations like the Greener Jobs Alliance, where Graham's from, on how we can invest in green skills in order to support this retraining revolution that has been suggested by government. And one of the key elements of that is how education actually threads together the other sectors in any green recovery. So Graham, who's been a long-standing UCU activist and one of my predecessors in this role that I'm in now. So wondered, Graham, whether you'd be able just to talk through in more detail about why that is the case, that education is so fundamental to a green recovery. And then maybe what some concrete steps branches can take. So there has a question that's come in. So I'll let you answer the first one and then I'll ask that follow-up.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. And yeah, thanks for the invitation to this webinar. In a way, I suppose, the question of why education skills are so crucial to a green recovery shouldn't have to be asked. But unfortunately, there's been a massive disconnect in terms of political strategy on this issue. And when you look at as we've done in the Green Jobs Alliance, the kind of industrial strategies that have been developed over the last, say, 10, 15 years, there's very little reference to the skills and training that's actually required. And climate change has virtually been non-existent. So what we really need, and it's slowly starting to happen, is bringing these things together. Where it has been talked about, one of the biggest problems has been that it's seen in a very narrow context. So it's just talking about providing education and training for workers in the renewable sector, for example. But it goes much broader than that. Of course, it covers every worker and every member of the future workforce, because what's clear is that everybody is going to have to know about what's needed in order to move to a zero carbon economy. And that isn't just simply wind turbine engineers, that includes people like accountants who need to understand the financial implications of this. So we've been very clear that this issue must be right at the heart of any industrial strategy. And so we were very pleased to see when the Committee on Climate Change report came out recently, that it did talk about all government departments must make sure that this is a coherent programme which looks at the issues of education and skills. And it's one of the reasons why we wrote to government ministers, particularly Sharma at BES and Gavin Williamson at Department for Education, to say, well, look, how are you now going to implement this committee report? So I think that's just a bit of background. I mean, now, of course, we're in a situation where we've had massive bailouts that have gone to industry. And the prospect, from seeing the news today, that there's going to be large-scale redundancies potentially taking place in September, October, when the furlough arrangements start being taken away. So what makes this crucial, I think, for us as a union, and for the student movement, is what we're faced with is a situation between now and, say, September, October, where there's going to be a massive requirement on retraining workers who are affected by potential redundancy, and to provide a workforce that's actually going to be in a position to take advantage of the transition to a low carbon economy. And we don't think that urgency is really understood at the moment. And if you look at Rishi Sunak's $3 billion bailout, not bailout, but proposal for energy efficiency, that's going some of the way, but a very small part of the way in terms of what's needed. And so what I think we need to do as a union, and combine with the education organisations that we work with, both employers, students, and the rest, is to actually make this case that the skills part of this whole agenda needs to be put right out there. Otherwise, all this talk about a green recovery is just not going to materialise.
Yeah, and on that, one of the questions that was submitted earlier was around the role of education, FE in particular, about equipping people and society to deal with the wave of job losses. And I know as UCU and SOS UK and Teach the Future and the AOC, actually, we submitted a joint letter to the Minister for Skills and the Chancellor about that issue. So I think it's going to be critical. Our green recovery strategy goes beyond lobbying, of course, that there's a real need for us to start making the case in our local branches and within our local communities. One of the questions that was put was, are there any concrete steps that branches can do to reach out to local communities and perhaps regional structures in making that case?
Yeah, I think that's going to be crucial. And when, hopefully when branches start looking at the material that the union and SOS have produced, what they should do is obviously put it into that local context. And it's clear that, that's going to be easier in some parts of the country than others. But, where you have got local authorities or regional authorities that are trying to make some progress on this issue, then it's going to be crucial that our branches actually are aware of that and see how their institution can actually make sure they're taking advantage of any of those local initiatives. Because particularly, things like the devolution of the adult skills budget, what's done at that kind of level is going to be crucial in terms of matching up what's always been the biggest problem, the demand and the supply of training provision. We saw, for example, with the government's Green Deal back in the Lib Dem, the Lib Con coalition, that what happened there was it wasn't thought through. There was all this attempt by colleges to equip staff and put on courses that were going to hopefully meet the demand that never actually occurred. So we had this problem that education institutions made investments in this area, but a lot of them really suffered as a result of that, because this whole kind of demand and supply thing was never actually properly addressed. And so we haven't got much time to do this. This is the problem. But that's got to be a key part, I think, of any strategy. And so we hope that, branches will actually be trying to make sure that, they push their local authorities and their colleges to tie all this up, because without that, it's going to go off half-cocked like it did last time.
Yeah. I mean, another pre-submitted question was, how can branches prioritise climate and sustainability when we're so busy fighting job cuts? And there is undoubtedly competing demands on branches now more than ever. But there are elements of the Green New Deal claim where we can try and organise and involve new activists within the union around Green New Deal issues and around defending jobs, for example. So one of the things that we've been doing is looking at potential financial savings as well as green ones around carbon emissions, for example. And branches can use the HESA data. So if any of you were on the financial webinar, that Andrew McGettigan ran, you'll have heard about how to access HESA data, and that's for HE institutions. There's not a same recording mechanism for FE, but we are drilling down into that at the moment. And one of the questions that came in was around, should we press for staff to resolve to attend international conferences online where possible, or to limit international travel?
Right. Well, on that one then, to start with, it's always been a bit of a contentious issue, isn't it? But I think we're now at the point where, if you look at the carbon emissions associated with international travel that are just going up and up, that clearly a policy, although it might not be popular amongst some staff, is going to be absolutely essential. So I think, when branches, as part of the whole kind of energy management approach to the Green New Deal, are looking at particularly things like Scope 3 emissions, which is what air travel is included under, that they do, have a clear view on that, of how they're going to be able to take members with them to show that this is absolutely essential, both in terms of a cost saving, but also in terms of emissions, and make the claim accordingly. And some branches have done this, so there is, case studies that we can put out there of where the whole issue of travel policy, whether it's travel within the country or external travel, is something that's probably addressed, but addressed in a way that doesn't penalise workers, because there are savings that can be made, but it's important to make sure that those savings are actually used to support things like, we talk about things like a just transition. Now, just transition can cost money, including things like retraining staff to make sure that they are delivering programs that are going to be relevant for the future. And so any savings like that should be put into a budget, if you like, to ensure that there's finance available to ensure that happens. There's basic things like car parking charges, never mind international travel. I know car parking's come up as a question as well. And the problem we've had is that these car parking charges in our institutions, but also elsewhere, have just been introduced without any proper consultation. And then the money that's raised isn't actually then dedicated to sustainability programs. So all of that's got to be challenged, both where the money goes, how much consultation was put in place, was the union viewpoint listened to, and so on. And hopefully people will find the guide helpful in terms of putting together that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I think there's an element of where those savings can be reinvested in, if we're looking at ways to help branches defend job cuts, is reinvestment into time to redevelop the curriculum along the lines that we were talking about earlier. So there's no point institutions, saying what amazing green credentials they have, unless they're willing to also invest the time and expertise needed to redevelop areas such as the curriculum. I think the other element of this is that branches should be making the case about sustainability in its broadest sense. So the current approaches to workload and how contracts are delivered, especially in FE, and in just institutional mismanagement now in more and more cases that we're seeing, isn't sustainable. So it isn't sustainable for us as individuals, it's not sustainable for our learners or the sectors as a whole. And as one of our Green Reps, I think, pointed out in a meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, there is a real need for us to draw attention to the links between our own well-being as workers and that of the climate. So what is good for us as workers is also good for the planet. And more than anything else, I think that's why it is such a relevant trade union issue for our branches to be campaigning and bargaining over. Just a quick check on the time. We have a few minutes. A really interesting question that came in about, can we include a claim for nationalising and democratising HE in the Green New Deal? I think it's a really interesting point, and I think there is the idea of the model claim is designed to be flexible, and it's designed to allow branches to incorporate things of priorities that they have discussed between them as a branch. But there is definitely space, I think, for alternative models on how institutions operate based on things like the Lucas Plan. I've just seen a comment that has come through there. And also Goldsmiths, while we've got somebody from Goldsmiths on, you know, they're really innovative gold paper that they drafted. So, you know, this is something that the bargaining negotiation team are looking at the moment around issuing separate advice over this approach. So get in touch if there is something that your branch would be interested in exploring and putting forward a really progressive agenda in a time when we are trying to defend our position. I think there is an opportunity post-COVID for us to really build back better, not only on climate-specific issues, but also how institutions operate in a very unsustainable way and how they treat their workers. I think if it was a national claim, then I think that's something that the HEC would have to explore around those. But certainly locally, there is no reason why branches can't use a Green New Deal approach to change for something really a bit different and something as an alternative to the models that have gone before. So yeah, so I think that's this bit finished, and we'll try and answer a few more questions in this final last 10 minutes that we have. There's a chance for everybody to be brought back in. We can run through some of those questions. So Scarlett, I don't know whether you're interested. There's been a question around equality and how we ensure equality is addressed as part of the Green New Deal.
I'd love to answer that. Yes. So I think when we look at the Green New Deal, we are really careful to conflate the issues of social justice with our climate emergency response, because the two are obviously inherently conflated. If you're living in the inner city, for example, you're going to be more prone to having high levels of air pollution exposed to you, which means that you're going to have more effects of climate change targeted towards you because of your socioeconomic background. So we need to ensure that when we're having these talks about how we're going to deal with the climate emergency, that we have representation from people of all different backgrounds. Because we know the composition of the heads of states are usually quite privileged, and we need to ensure that it's not just their voices who are taking over, I guess, the negotiating tables when we come to figuring out our response. So that comes from having union involvement, so we've got representation for workers. It comes from having people from marginalized backgrounds, whether that be because they have a disability or they are BAME. And we need to ensure that this representation is consistent. So it's not just a one-off meeting or something, but we've got input from people who are being directly affected consistently throughout the whole process of when we're legislating and when we're working towards implementing a Green New Deal. Because it is essentially there to solve not only the climate crisis, but also the inequality crisis. And we can't do that without direct input and feedback from people who are being affected.
Thank you, Scarlett. I think we've had another question submitted, Pat Atkinson. I think that Scarlett's earlier point on climate change anxiety is very important, especially in a time of likely recession. Anxiety can be paralyzing, so education has some work to do here, important to alert and support. I was wondering, Quinn, if you maybe wanted to say something in response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jo. I think climate anxiety so often comes up in these discussions around kind of embedding more issues around climate justice, the climate emergency, and the ecological crisis in the curriculum. And It's very true. I think young people and people right across society are experiencing really high levels of anxiety to do with the crises that we face in society. And I think probably truer than ever now, experiencing issues around COVID on top of that. But I think when we talk about climate anxiety in the context of education, it's really important that we understand that the best antidote to climate anxiety is deepening our education about these issues and equipping learners with the skills and the attributes to enable them to tackle these challenges in their institutions, in their communities, and with their friends and families and people that they care about. Because so often avoiding discussion about the things that may make us uncomfortable or scared actually only serves to worsen those feelings and worsen those problems. So it's a real responsibility that our education system needs to take to actually deepen the engagement with these issues so as to prepare learners to really tackle these issues and develop agency and ownership over the challenges that we face rather than kind of shying away from it. Because in this information age, people are going to access the information and going to understand the crises that we face. And education needs to be equipping people for the realities that they face today and in the future.
Thank you. Scarlett, I wondered if you wanted to say anything or comment on that as well.
I think we're also in such a few different certainty where mental health problems are also being exacerbated. And that's because of things like COVID and also increasing pressures from the education system, for example, and making sure that teachers have and other teaching professionals have adequate knowledge in order to be dealing with this in students is not only going to help things like climate anxiety, but wider problems with mental health in students.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Thanks. So we have another question. What extra help will be made available to FE, adult and prison education members wanting to raise Green New Deal issues in their workplace, as HE members have been more active in this area? Marianne, I think maybe you could help with this one.
Yeah, sure. So I also have the pleasure of looking after our prison education members, and we do have environmental green reps within our prison branch structures. As with adult ed, because our prison members and adult ed work in buildings that are controlled by a different employer, there are limits on what we can do there. But certainly in terms of developing climate-based curriculum, I know in prison education we are looking at our webinar in August, on August the 11th, how we can affect change on climate curriculum within the prison contracts as they stand at the moment. So yeah, everyone's still welcome to attend the training, but it will be, we have to think about the problem a bit differently given the nature that they're operating on other premises.
Yeah, and I think that echoes the sort of local aspect, doesn't it, that Graham was talking about earlier. We also had a question about the Green New Deal claim, and where here it is on the screen now. Where can we access the UCU Green New Deal document? Marianne, again, do you want to maybe say a little bit something about this?
Yeah, so because it has top leverage tips and some guides as to how branches might approach this strategically, it's not going to be readily available on our website. So it's going to sit behind the firewall for branch officer access, and that will go live to that link next week when the training has started. So if you can keep an update on our environmental web pages, the link and the accessing that using your membership details will be available there. And obviously we'll be tweeting about it and putting that in branch updates on where branches can access the document itself.
Thank you so much. I think we really have to wind up now, but for everyone who's in UCU that's watching this, please do follow the link to our training courses. They are currently open for registration, and we want to get as many people trained up as possible. As I said at the beginning, UCU has been developing policy and building alliances to address climate change for over 10 years. This new wall chart that we've developed, we want you to be able to download that, put it in your offices, put it in your staff rooms, put it in your classrooms, put it in the kitchen, put it in the corridor. We want it to be everywhere in your workplace. We'll be doing some print runs as soon as we're able to. We've got a big print room in UCU's Carlo Street office. Join the huge network that we've created of green reps and really pushing tertiary education employers to do everything they can. I think our wall chart, it really presents a snapshot of climate activism and the solidarity that we really need to build across the borders that we have to achieve climate justice, because as the wall chart says, this is the future that we choose, and we want you to choose it with us. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers. And thank you again to Jennifer, who's been signing for us. And take care of yourselves, and see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.